"I'll give you my company if you win the race with that piece of junk," laughed the Arab billionaire, but the result was shocking. At that moment, at 3:42 p.m. on a Friday in July, in the parking lot of a commercial tower in Manhattan, Faisal Al-Rahman, 42, CEO of Rahman Holdings, pointed to the dusty 1967 Cadillac parked next to his $3 million red Bugatti Chiron. His voice was loud enough for the 23 executives and investors around him to hear, every word laden with contempt. Next to the Cadillac, James Washington, 68, a black janitor who had worked in the building for 42 years, held a bunch of keys in his calloused hands, his face impassive as always. "You parked that relic in my spot," Faisal said, adjusting his gold cufflinks while his white keffiyeh swayed slightly in the warm summer breeze. His tie was loosened, his Armani suit impeccable despite the heat. "Do you think this is acceptable?" James looked at the spot he had taken. All the others were full. "I thought it would be okay for a few minutes while I unloaded cleaning supplies." Faisal laughed. It was a laugh that contained no humor, only pure condescension. His investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some already had their cell phones raised, filming. It was the kind of moment that went viral, and everyone knew it. "I'll give you a chance," Faisal stepped forward, his voice getting louder. "Race me. To the parking lot exit and back. If this pile of rust beats my Bugatti, I'll give you Rahman Holdings. The whole company." A murmur exploded among the witnesses. Someone whispered, "This is crazy." Another murmured, "Is he serious?" Older investor Theodore Banks touched Faisal's arm. "Maybe it's not a good idea to do this publicly." Faisal shook off the touch. "I'm showing these people what real power means. There's no risk here." He looked at James with a cruel smile. "Unless you're afraid of embarrassing me in front of everyone." James was silent for too long. He studied Faisal with eyes that had seen generations of powerful men come and go. Then he looked at the Cadillac, a car that had belonged to his father, a mechanic who died 15 years ago when James was 53. A car that James had kept running all these years with his own hands, despite having to work 16 hours a day to pay the bills after his wife fell ill. A car that carried more memories than Faisal could buy with all his money. "All right," James said calmly. "Let's race." An explosion of voices. Cell phones multiplied, all capturing different angles. Faisal's assistant, a young man in his 20s wearing a cheap suit, whispered to his colleague next to him, he really accepted. "This is going to be a massacre." But there was something about James's calmness that made some people stop laughing. It was the quietness of someone who had survived things that men like Faisal would never face. It was the peace of someone who had nothing to prove because he had already proven everything that mattered. Faisal walked over to the Bugatti, caressing the metallic red hood as if it were a work of art. 1,500 horsepower, he announced to the growing audience. 0 to 60 in 2.4 seconds. Built to dominate. He opened the door, the soft sound of precision engineering. The black leather and carbon fiber interior gleamed in the sun. James walked over to the Cadillac without saying a word. He opened the door, which creaked slightly, and slid into the cracked leather seat that had molded to his body over decades. The dashboard was dusty, the steering wheel worn. But when he turned the key, the engine started immediately. A deep, steady, reliable sound. The crowd moved into a better position, forming an improvised starting line. Employees began to appear at the windows of the building, attracted by the commotion. Security tried to organize the scene, but it was too late. The moment had a life of its own now. Faisal revved the Bugatti's engine, the sound exploding across the parking lot like thunder. People covered their ears. James remained still, hands on the steering wheel, staring ahead. Theodore Banks approached James's window. "Sir, you don't have to do this. Faisal is being an idiot, but you don't have to humiliate yourself." James turned his head slowly. He looked at the older man with an expression that revealed nothing. "I'm not humiliating myself. I'm finishing what he started." What no one in that crowd knew, what Faisal could not imagine in his arrogance inflated by a lifetime of privilege, was that James Washington was not just a janitor. He was a man who grew up in a mechanic's shop in the Bronx, the son of a legendary mechanic who repaired classic cars for gangsters and businessmen. He was a boy who learned about engines before he learned to read, who could hear a problem with a car a block away. He was a father who worked 3 jobs to pay for his daughter's engineering degree after his wife died of cancer. And he was a man who had spent every Sunday for the past 15 years keeping a 1967 Cadillac running, not out of nostalgia, but because he knew that someday, somehow, he would need that car to prove something that words could never prove. The security supervisor raised his arm. On the count of 3. 1. The Bugatti's engine roared louder. 2. James took a deep breath, remembering his father telling him when he was 12 that good cars don't scream, son. They speak softly and work hard. 3. If you want to know how a man who has underestimated his entire life turned the tables on a billionaire who thought money could buy anything, if your heart is racing to see justice served, subscribe to the channel. Because Faisal Al-Rahman was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life, and James Washington was about to prove that some engines, like some people, get stronger the longer they last. The Bugatti exploded from the starting line with a roar that made the concrete shake. Tires screamed, white smoke rose, and in 2 seconds Faisal was already 50 meters ahead, disappearing down the parking ramp like a red missile. The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone shouted, "It's over." Another laughed, "It's a matter of seconds." Cell phones followed Bugatti until it disappeared from view, then slowly returned to Cadillac. James hadn't accelerated dramatically. He left the line with constant pressure on the accelerator, the engine purring low and steady. No show, no fire in the tires. Just steady, controlled movement. It seemed almost respectful. Almost polite. But what no one saw was what James had been doing for the past 6 months. Every Friday night, after a 16-hour shift cleaning offices, he would go down to the basement of a small apartment in Queens where he kept his father's tools. He would open the hood of the Cadillac and work until dawn. He wasn't just keeping the car alive. He was transforming it. The original 400 horsepower V8 engine had been completely rebuilt. Every part was cleaned, balanced, and optimized. The carburetor was replaced with an electronic fuel injection system that James built from scrap parts and 40 years of knowledge repairing anything with wheels. The suspension was reinforced, the brakes were upgraded, and the transmission was tuned for smooth but brutal power delivery. He couldn't afford new parts. So he improvised. He used parts from a 2003 Mustang from the junkyard, a Camaro clutch that someone had thrown away, an electrical system he rebuilt with wires left over from an office renovation. Every Sunday, his daughter, Jennifer, 29, a mechanical engineer at Tesla, came to help. She had learned from him when she was a girl, and now she was giving back her knowledge. "Dad, this won't work in theory," she would say, looking at the hybrid engine they had created. James would smile. "Theory is for those who have money to make mistakes. We have to get it right the first time." And they did. What James and Jennifer built was not just an engine. It was a statement. Each bolt they tightened was for every time someone looked at James as if he were invisible. Each timing adjustment was for every time Faisal passed him in the hallway without saying good morning. Each acceleration test in the empty parking lot at 3 in the morning was preparation for the moment James knew would eventually come, because men like Faisal always underestimate people who do work they consider inferior. And when you're underestimated long enough, you learn to turn invisibility into an advantage. Faisal completed a lap around the parking lot in 42 seconds, the Bugatti's tires singing at every turn. He could see James in the rearview mirror, still on his first lap, moving at a speed that seemed almost insulting in its slowness. He laughed to himself in the car. This was exactly what he had hoped for. Public and irrefutable proof of superiority. The video would be gold on social media. Faisal Al-Rahman, a born winner, dominating even a janitor who dared to challenge him. Investors would see that he not only had money, he had audacity. He had power that couldn't be bought. But when Faisal entered the second lap, something changed. The Bugatti's engine temperature rose. A warning light flashed on the dashboard. He frowned. He ignored it. Probably just the heat of the day. He accelerated harder coming out of the curve, pushing the machine to its limits. Another light. Then another. The engine began to hesitate, losing power when accelerating. The smell of overheating invaded the cabin. "Not now," Faisal muttered, punching the steering wheel. "Not in front of everyone." James maintained a steady speed, feeling the Cadillac respond to his every command as if it were an extension of his own body. He knew every vibration, every sound, every nuance of that engine because he had built it with his own hands. On the final curve, he allowed himself a slight smile. Not one of arrogance. One of quiet satisfaction at a job well done. Of knowledge that comes from decades of doing something so well that it becomes art. The Cadillac's engine wasn't screaming. It was singing. Theodore Banks, watching from the finish line, narrowed his eyes. Something was wrong. Bugatti had slowed down. He could hear the engine coughing, an irregular sound that shouldn't come from a $3 million machine. And Cadillac, that supposed piece of junk, was moving with a fluidity that seemed impossible for a 57-year-old car. James finished the first lap just as Faisal completed the second, but the speed difference had narrowed dramatically. The crowd began to notice. Voices grew quieter, uncertain. Someone whispered, "Wait, what's going on?" Faisal's Bugatti died 20 meters from the finish line. The engine gave one last pathetic gasp and stopped completely, the dashboard lights flashing like a faulty Christmas tree. Shocked silence fell over the crowd. Cell phones trembled in the hands of people who couldn't process what they were seeing. Faisal punched the steering wheel 3 times, shouting Arabic profanities that echoed through the empty parking lot. He tried to start the engine. Nothing. He tried again. The engine wouldn't even turn over. The deep, steady hum of the Cadillac grew behind him. James approached slowly, stopping beside the immobilized Bugatti. He rolled down the dusty window and looked at Faisal through the Bugatti's glass. "Need a ride?" His voice was calm, without sarcasm or triumph. Just a genuine question from a man offering help. Faisal slowly turned his head, his face red with humiliation and anger. His eyes met James's. For 3 long seconds, no one breathed. "The race isn't over yet," James said calmly. "Do you want to finish it or not?" The crowd erupted. "This isn't happening," someone shouted. Another laughed nervously. Theodore Banks covered his mouth with his hand, shocked by the audacity of the moment. Jennifer, James's daughter, had arrived minutes earlier, drawn by frantic messages from colleagues. She stood at the edge of the crowd, eyes brimming with pride as she watched her father offer dignity to a man who didn't deserve it. Faisal looked at the investors filming everything. He looked at the assistants with their mouths agape. He looked at the cell phones capturing his humiliation in high definition for eternity. Then he looked at the unlocked door of the Cadillac, a silent invitation. He got out of the Bugatti with trembling legs. He walked to the Cadillac like a man going to his execution. He opened the passenger door and got into the cracked leather seat that smelled of oil and history. He closed the door gently. James said nothing. He just started the car, accelerating so smoothly that Faisal barely felt it. They crossed the finish line in absolute silence, the old dusty Cadillac carrying the defeated billionaire as a passenger of his own humiliation. When they stopped, Faisal didn't move right away. He sat there, staring at the old dashboard, at James's hands on the steering wheel, hands calloused from decades of work he never respected. "You knew," Faisal said softly. "You knew it would break." James turned off the engine. He knew that machines have limits. And that people who rely only on expensive machines forget to learn how things really work. "You built this engine, didn't you?" Faisal's voice was barely audible. James nodded. "Every Friday night for 6 months. My daughter helped me. She's an engineer. She learned from me when she was little, when I was just a janitor who fixed broken things because I couldn't afford to buy new ones." Faisal opened the door and stepped out to face the silent crowd. Cameras waiting, investors watching, shocked employees. Theodore Banks stepped forward. "Richard, this was broadcast live to shareholders. The board is calling an emergency meeting." Faisal swallowed hard. James calmly got out of the Cadillac, stretching his back as he always did after driving. "I don't want your company," he said before Faisal could speak. "I ran because you asked me to. But I don't need what you have. I already have what matters." The youngest investor, Sarah Chun, a 40-year-old fund manager, approached James. "I recorded everything. The challenge, the race, the offer. You technically won." Deliberate pause. "And 20 million people watched it live." James looked at her, then at Faisal. "I didn't come here to take anything from anyone. I came to work, as I always do." He turned to leave. Jennifer ran to hug her father, tears streaming down her face. Her pride visible for all to see. Faisal stood there, realizing that losing his company would be less painful than what he had actually lost. Respect. Credibility. The illusion of superiority. His assistant approached with his cell phone. "Sir, Twitter is exploding. The hashtag Bugatti humility is trending worldwide. and the board has scheduled a vote for Monday on your leadership." Faisal closed his eyes. The sound of a Cadillac starting made him open them again. He saw James driving toward the exit, the old car that had defeated the $3 million machine, the man who had been invisible for 42 years finally seen by everyone. Theodore Banks approached Faisal. "You didn't lose the race today. You lost something much more valuable. You lost the chance to learn that power doesn't come from how much you have, but from how much you can do with your own hands. And now the whole world has seen who you really are." Cameras were still rolling when Faisal crashed into the dead Bugatti, a billionaire defeated by a janitor he never bothered to get to know. A man who proved that experience beats money, that preparation beats arrogance, and that underestimating the wrong person can cost more than any company is worth. 3 months later, James was in the same parking lot, cleaning windows on the 10th floor as he always did. But something had changed. Employees stopped to greet him by name. Executives held the door open for him. New hires asked to take pictures with the man who went viral with 28 million views and turned the hashtag #BugattiHumility into a movement about respect at work. James accepted the attention with the same calmness with which he had accepted the challenge, without letting it change who he was. He still arrived at 6 in the morning and still worked until the last window sparkled. Faisal was not so lucky. The board voted unanimously to remove him as CEO on the Monday after the race. An investigation revealed other cases of verbal abuse of employees, all documented but ignored because he generated profits. The video of the race wasn't just viral, it was evidence. Sarah Chun took over as interim CEO, and her first change was a zero-tolerance policy on respect. Faisal tried to sue for defamation, claiming that the engine had been sabotaged. Expert analysis showed that the Bugatti overheated due to improper use on a hot day, driven aggressively without an adequate warm-up period. Exactly what an experienced mechanic would have predicted. Jennifer got a promotion at Tesla after her father's story reached CEO Elon Musk, who tweeted, "This is the kind of ingenuity that built America, not parental money." She now led a team developing technology to make electric cars more affordable, using the philosophy her father taught her: build with what you have, make it work with what you know. Every night she called James, telling him about her day, listening to his advice. Their bond, forged in a dirty workshop in Queens 15 years ago, was now stronger than ever. The Cadillac went to the Smithsonian Museum for a special exhibition on American ingenuity. James refused to sell it, but agreed to loan it for a year. The plaque read, "Built by James Washington and his daughter Jennifer." Proof that knowledge passed down through generations is worth more than any expensive machine. The engine that beat Bugatti had no original parts, but it had something money can't buy: soul. Next to the car, a video loop showed the race, but the most watched part was not the victory. It was the moment when James offered Faisal a ride. Generosity when revenge would have been easier. Faisal sold the broken Bugatti for a fraction of its original value. He moved to Dubai, where his family still had business. He sent a letter to James 3 weeks ago. Expensive paper, shaky handwriting. It said things about humility learned too late, about realizing that he had spent his whole life buying things but never learned to build anything. James read it once, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. He didn't reply. Some lessons don't need forgiveness, just recognition. Theodore Banks created a scholarship fund for the children of general service employees, named in James's honor. The first beneficiary was the son of a third-floor cleaning lady, now studying civil engineering at Columbia. At the inauguration ceremony, James spoke to a full room. "I'm no hero," he said. "I'm a man who was lucky to have a father who taught me that all honest work deserves respect, and a daughter who reminded me that shared knowledge multiplies." Applause filled the room, but James saw what mattered. A cleaning lady crying in the back row, holding the hand of her son who would have opportunities she never had. The video of the race was still shown in business classrooms as an example of how arrogance destroys leadership. A professor at Harvard used it to teach that quiet competence trumps loud confidence. An instructor at Stanford showed it to teach that diversity is not just a nice word, it is a competitive advantage because people from different backgrounds bring knowledge that the privileged will never learn. And in auto repair shops across the country, fathers showed it to their sons, saying this is why you learn to fix things, not just buy them. James still drove his Cadillac on Sundays when he wasn't at the museum. He washed it with the same dedication he used to clean windows. The engine purred softly, reminding him of him and Jennifer working side by side, building more than just a machine. Building a legacy. Every time he started the engine, he heard his father's voice, dead for 15 years but still present in every carburetor adjustment, every perfect synchronization. Good cars don't scream, son. They speak softly and work hard. In the rearview mirror, James saw the building where he had worked for 42 years. The same windows he had cleaned millions of times. The same parking lot where a man had tried to humiliate him and ended up teaching the whole world a lesson. James smiled a small smile that he kept to himself. Not because he won the race, but because he proved what he always knew. A person's value is not in what they have, but in what they can do. And when you build something with your own hands, whether it's an engine or a life, no one can take that away from you. If this story touched you, if you believe that all work deserves respect, that knowledge is worth more than money, that humility beats arrogance, subscribe to the channel. Because James Washington proved that the quietest man in the parking lot can teach the richest man in the building the most important lesson. And that sometimes, offering your enemy a ride is sweeter revenge than any victory. Because it shows that you didn't need to win to prove your worth. You already knew how much you were worth all along.